Coming in at number 10 as a bit of an honorable mention is the Batman Who Laughs. Now, the reason this villain is only getting an honorable mention is because he's relatively new and has had a huge amount of publicity in the few years since his creation. But I still do think this character deserves some more exploration further down the road. As a twisted combination of Bruce Wayne and the Joker from the Dark Multiverse, the Batman Who Laughs was an incredibly intimidating villain that only got even more powerful when he gained the powers of Dr. Manhattan and became the Darkest Knight. But seeing as how he was then killed by God Mode Wonder Woman, and I do think that the Batman Who Laughs deserves a comeback in the near future so that we can see what really happens when the true Batman and the Batman Who Laughs go head to head. Coming in at number 9, coming in at number 8, we have the malicious psychologist known as Hugo Strange. One of Batman's oldest villains, originally debuting only 9 issues after the Caped Crusader himself in Detective Comics, Professor Hugo Strange was also one of the very first villains to ever figure out his secret identity as Bruce Wayne. While initially depicted as a typical mad scientist stereotype, using a weather machine to hide his minions' robberies with a thick layer of fog, more recent interpretations of the character have seen him as a devious manipulator, using his position of power as a doctor of psychology to examine the criminals of Arkham Asylum and scheming to gain power in Gotham City. It's this emphasis on mental ability rather than actual superpowers that makes Hugo Strange such an interesting villain to deal with, and why he definitely deserves to come back in a major Batman storyline.
And at 7, nobody. Morgan Ducard was the son of Henry Ducard, a world-renowned assassin, and Felicity Strode, a spy sent to kill Henry, who instead fell in love with him. I have to say though, that's the dream. Having a love so strong that even your assassin can't kill you, that's goals. From an early age, though he did not see him often, Morgan idolized his father. When his mother was contacted by the people who had hired her to kill Ducard years ago, telling her that if she failed to fulfill her end of the deal that they would kill her son, the young boy stabbed his mother to death with a kitchen knife. His father saw what he had done and appreciated Morgan's devotion to him, deciding to train his son to become an assassin like him. Ah, family bonding. Several years later, a young Bruce Wayne came to France hoping to train under Henry Ducard, but Bruce drew more attention to himself than he should have, and Morgan was sent to assassinate him. The American and Frenchman fought each other, but due to his prior training, Bruce ended up defeating Morgan and surviving the attack. This is when Morgan grew a hatred for Bruce, since after surviving, Henry decided to train him instead of killing him being Bruce Wayne in this scenario. Nobody would then go on to train Bruce's son Damian Wayne, and even was killed by Damian. And at 6, the Court of Owls. They are a violent cabal who uses architecture and murder to yield political influence throughout history. Their legend is told only through whispers and a nursery rhyme that bears their name. To carry out their interests, they employ a breed of highly trained assassins known as Talons. The leaders of the organization appear to be human and wear owl masks on their faces, whereas the rest of the court on the other hand are mutated and appear to actually be human-owl hybrids. Like, their owl-like distorted faces, long claws, and their eating style seemingly prove this, unless they're just really into roleplay. The Court of Owls takes notice when billionaire playboy philanthropist Bruce Wayne announces plans to rebuild and reshape Gotham City for the future. He is then sentenced to death by the group, and their assassin, the Talon, attempts to kill him during a meeting with politician Lincoln March. They struggle at the top of Wayne Tower, and the killer survives a fall from the top. Batman then begins to investigate, and he discovers that their society has secret headquarters throughout hidden rooms in every building established by the Alan Wayne Trust. So, yeah, a little personal. Halfway through in at number 5, Clayface. Basil Karlo, the original Clayface, was an actor who was driven mad when he heard of a remake of his classic horror film that he starred in, Dread Castle, and that he actually wouldn't be playing the lead role. Adopting the persona of Clayface, the villain from one of his old films, he became a serial killer that was targeting the cast and crew. He was eventually stopped by Batman and Robin, but later Karlo would actually be imbued with the powers of Clayface's Preston Payne and Sandra Fuller. While we may know about this character, the actual mysterious part of him comes from his DNA and his ability to copy a person's DNA. This actually ended up causing Edward Nygma, aka the Riddler, to learn Bruce's identity while he was recovering from cancer in the Lazarus Pit, since Clayface pretended to be a reanimated Boy Wonder and caused the epiphany. There is also the mystery of how in some continuities detached parts of his body can actually develop their own sentience, like in the Harley Quinn animated series, aptly known as the Quinverse. This is actually a thing. Yeah, you can lose his hand and then his hand will gain sentience. It's weird. And at 4, Joker's daughter. This is just a girl who finds Joker's face and then stitches it onto hers and then goes berserk. So honestly, it's not really Joker's daughter, but I believe it. The only person that I think could commit such an act is in fact the Joker. I mean, like, he did. He cut it off and then put it back on for death of the family, but anyway. While maybe not as prolific and accomplished as the Joker, Joker's daughter is definitely mysterious enough to make this list. Even if I'm pretty sure plenty of people know about her, but hey, that's fine. It's about mysterious, not unknown villains, right? Not to mention the fact that she also went by Catgirl, Scarecrow, Riddler's daughter, Penguin's daughter, Card Queen, and Harley Quinn. Each incarnation also calling herself the respected super person's daughter, which I have to say is going to make a family reunion real weird. But in actuality, she ended up being Dula Dent, Two-Face's daughter, I guess, apparently, which is still seemingly BS, but hey, that's why it's a mystery.
Coming in at number 3, we have the iconic Harvey Dent, aka Two-Face. Originally fighting for the side of justice with Bruce Wayne as Gotham's district attorney, Harvey Dent's mind was split in two following an acid attack that scarred exactly one half of his face. Making all of his decisions through a coin flip based on his past childhood trauma, Two-Face is one of the most well-known villains of Batman, but hasn't gotten a chance in recent years to really headline an event as a villain, usually only taking the focus in smaller storylines or as a supporting character. Personally, I think Two-Face is long overdue to take his place as a master of the criminal underworld. Coming in at number 2, we have Bruce Wayne's former childhood friend and current adulthood enemy, Hush. Born under the name of Thomas Elliot, Hush as a child was one of the first people to inspire Bruce on his road to becoming Batman. However, Thomas Elliot was a deranged child, wishing to have his family's fortune for himself and killing both of his parents to have it. After traveling the world and training to become a warrior, Hush adopted his supervillain persona and allied himself with the Riddler to rid the world of Bruce Wayne, organizing many of his enemies and even allies against him. And while the villain has appeared several times since, it's been a while since we've truly gotten to see the master manipulator Hush at work. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have the Phantasm, aka Andrea Beaumont. Originally debuting in the animated film Batman: Mask of the Phantasm, Andrea Beaumont was Bruce Wayne's first love, the girl he almost considered abandoning his mission as Batman for before the mission had even begun. Unfortunately for Bruce, Andrea and his relationship was forced to an end by the death of her father, causing Andrea to begin her descent into becoming the vengeful spirit known as the Phantasm. As a villain with an incredibly cool design and a very personal connection to Batman, the Phantasm has been only recently seen in the comics, and definitely takes my top pick for the villain that most deserves another storyline.
Number 10. Microwave Man. Also known as Louis Paget, we meet this villain in Action Comics number 487 in 1978. A space traveler, he returned to Earth after 40 years of flying through the stars aboard an alien spacecraft. Before he began his journey, he was already the costumed villain Microwave Man. Upon returning to Earth, he calls on his alien friends to grant him his youth back, but it comes at a cost. His life will be shortened to just a few hours. He says, yeah, I'm good with that. He just wants the opportunity to defeat Superman. So Superman agrees and even allows Microwave Man to defeat him in a test of strength. Louis dies satisfied and the aliens claim his body and they set him adrift in space. It's a touching story in which the villain is dispatched within 2 issues, meaning we will probably never see him again. It's nice though. Hey gang, before we hit number 9, I really need you guys to hit that like button. It's not required, I will continue with the list either way, but we do appreciate it. Number 9. Sand Superman. First appearing in Superman 233 in 1971, Sand Superman is exactly what he sounds like. Created from a portal between Earth and the Quorum dimension, Sand Superman just wants to drain Superman of all his power and knowledge. However, as it gains energy, he also gains the desire to act like Superman, including serving unselfishly as a superhero. Unfortunately, Superman can't really take him on as a sidekick or anything like that for 2 reasons. 1, Sand Superman only gains power by taking it away from Superman. And 2, if they were to actually touch each other ever, Sand Superman's alternatively charged atoms would just result in a huge explosion big enough to destroy the entire planet. Sand Superman's story was really not all that lengthy, so it's pretty easy to see why he hasn't returned. Coming in at number 8, J. Wilbur Wolfenham. He would call himself a business consultant or philanthropist, but make no mistake, he is a con man. Mr. Wolfenham first appeared in Superman 341 and was erased from existence following the collapse of the multiverse during the Crisis on Infinite Earth series. In his debut, he has a scheme to sell amulets which allegedly teleport the wearer to safety if a disaster strikes. Superman comes along and decides to put this product to the test. This all happens in a story called The Man Who Could Cancel Catastrophe. In another story called Sale of the Century, Wilbur thinks he's pulled off a master scam by selling the Earth off to an alien real estate agent until the alien actually comes back, and then of course Superman has to come straighten everything out. This guy is seriously a real piece of work, but we haven't seen him again since 1985. Coming in at number 7, Funny Face. We meet Funny Face in Superman 19 in 1942. Making him possibly the oldest villain on this list. In his story, Case of the Funny Paper Crimes, he brings some villains to life from a comic strip, including Machine Gun Mike and the Black Raider, and he sends these guys out to rob the stores of Metropolis in a super dastardly evil scheme. Just go out there and rob everything, you guys. Superman takes them on one at a time, eventually figuring out what's going on and that they've come from the Funny Pages. While Superman is busy, Funny Face kidnaps Lois Lane and transforms her from a real person into a comic book character. Superman forms up a team with some other comic strip heroes that have been brought to life, and together they rescue Lois and take down the villains. This guy last appeared in 1986, and I seriously hope we see him again. He's crazy looking. Oh man. Number 6, Mr. Jeez, is that an L in there? Anyway, the name is intended to be unpronounceable. We'll just call him Mixie. First appearing in Superman Volume 2 in 1987, Mixie is an imp from the 5th dimension who periodically visits and gives Superman a hard time. He first appears as a dashing young man by the name of Ben DeRoy and convinces Lois Lane to marry him. Superman eventually puts 2 and 2 together, and the imp agrees to go back home if Superman can get him to type, spell, or say his name backwards. Not Superman's name, but the other guy's crazy name. So, this evil, nefarious dude, he creates a giant typewriter and he makes up a name on the spot, choosing the name I mentioned earlier, figuring, oh, this is gonna be impossible for Superman. Superman defiantly says something along the lines of, "You couldn't even type that name forwards." And so Mixie does it and demonstrates, not realizing Superman has already rewired the typewriter, causing Mixie to write his own name backwards, vanishing himself. He once even tried to do nice things, granting people's wishes, but not in the right way. For example, a woman wishes that her dough would finally rise, and it fills her entire home, pouring out onto the street. Another scene has a bunch of people wishing they had a Riverview apartment, so he makes their building sprout legs and literally walk over to the river. This villain did appear in 2008, but I think he still counts as forgotten. And honestly, he's too bizarre for me not to mention. Number 5, Black Rock. First appearing in Justice League America number 43 in 1990, Peter Silverstone was an American scientist, the Director of Research and Technology for the United Broadcasting Company. His task was to create a corporate-backed superhero that the UBC could provide exclusive coverage of. He creates a suit that gives the wearer power over broadcasting frequencies. The suit is powered by a mysterious sentient black stone. Silverstone manipulated his boss and his nephew into wearing the suit before he finally tries it on for himself. Sad to say though, after years and years of butting heads with Superman and losing, he becomes a washed up, failed villain who hangs out with guys like Kite Man. Eventually, he is driven mad by overuse of the Black Stone powers and winds up getting killed by Sam Benjamin, who then steals the stone and becomes the new Black Rock. Number 4, the Prankster. Oswald Loomis first appeared in 1988, the popular host of The Uncle Oswald Show, an early morning children's program. When ratings for his show plummeted and it was cancelled, Oswald totally lost it and went on a pranking spree, terrorizing Metropolis. He once even held Lois Lane hostage and tried to marry her. Later in life, he sells his soul to Lord Satanus, and this changes him, making him young and athletic. He is a manic trickster who uses futuristic technology to create gadgets and weapons, all while retaining a comical theme. This guy doesn't come up as often as other practical joke inspired villains such as Joker and the Riddler, so we haven't seen him for a bit. Number 3, Terra Man. When DC Comics rebooted everything with the New 52 in 2011, this guy was recreated to better suit a modern audience. But in 1972, he first appeared in Superman 249 as Tobias Manning, a desperado cowboy sent into the future. When he was young, he encountered an alien during his first holdup, while his father was recovering from a gunshot wound. The alien decides to take the boy and raise him for himself, taking him off into space and teaching him how to handle futuristic weapons. The alien, known as the Collector, also gave Toby a winged horse named Nova, which became his steed. He calls himself Terra Man and travels with the Collector, robbing and plundering all through space until his memories return, and one day he kills the Collector to avenge his father. He then travels to Earth, where he continues acting like a cowboy and performing nefarious evil deeds. He has some hilarious Western themed gadgets, including an energy lasso and a chewing tobacco capable of aging Superman. Number 2, Dragorin. First appearing in 1971, Dragorin is the man from Transylvania. Transylvania is a miniature planet Superman visits with his friend Jimmy Olsen in Superman's Pal Jimmy Olsen, Volume 1. Man, wouldn't it be nice to be Superman's pal? He's literally just a vampire. We think the writers might have been phoning it in a bit on this one. Throughout the story, Superman and Jimmy encounter not only Dragorin, but a werewolf too. I really wish I had more to tell you about this guy, but there is a reason that he's a forgotten villain.
Number 1, Super Menace. Super Menace is definitely one of the most out there villains that you probably haven't heard of. The origin of Super Menace is that when Superman got sent to Earth in a spaceship from Krypton, his spaceship collided with another alien spaceship, which was Super Menace's. What happened from that collision was Superman's spaceship got copied and duplicated into this other one, creating the persona Super Menace. He landed with parents that definitely were no Martha or Jonathan Kent, and instead of growing up loved, he grew up in a not so good household where he ultimately became a villain. You know, the Super Menace.
Kicking off the list at number 10, we have the Thousand, aka Carl King. The Thousand made a brief but memorable appearance in the comics, beginning with Spider-Man Tangled Web number 1, back in 2001. Carl's origin story is quite compelling, as he actually witnessed Peter Parker obtain his powers by being bitten by the radioactive spider. He's clearly upset and a tad jealous. The opening of the issue has him just staring out of a cafe window, just stewing in the fact that it should have been him instead of Peter Parker to get those powers, which, you know what, I understand, man. I say that every single time I watch a Marvel movie. So, making a terrifying entrance, he reveals himself as the Thousand. So instead of getting the same powers as Peter, he actually turned into 1,000 spiders. No, I don't like that. I feel sick looking at this guy. The last page of his first issue really pulls you in. It's his skin suit, like it's his skin as a suit, just chilling on a coat hook, while he takes over Miss Peyton, even revealing that he ate her from the inside out. He's a bunch of spiders that take over your body. No wonder we didn't hear much about this guy. Yuck. Next, get out of here. And before we move on with our list, guys, if you haven't already, please toss us a like down below. It's a big help to us here at our secret underground bunker. Thank you so much. Okay, back to these crazy villains.
Number 9, Morbius. Morbius isn't always a Spider-Man villain, but he did start out in the comics that way. Although he is more of a neutral figure inherently, his pseudoscientific vampirism and bloodthirst often put him in the villain category, and put him in conflict with none other than Spider-Man. Which I also kind of get, considering that the first time they met, like most old school comics, they had some miscommunication which led to a fight between Morbius, the Lizard, and Spider-Man. And during the fight, everyone seemed to miraculously discover they needed the other's blood to become cured from their ailment. And so the blood wars began, and the stealing and baiting of blood would become a common trope for the sometimes villain known as Morbius. He's like a blood bandit. He loves to steal that blood.
Coming in at number 8, we have Swarm. Oh, you thought I was done with disgusting Swarm villains. No, think again. Fritz von Meyer made his debut in Champions issue 14 back in 1977. And as you can probably guess by his name, yes, he's made of a swarm of bees. Kind of like the Thousand, except somehow worse. He's also a scientist. So, for sure worse. Definitely worse. He used stolen gold to pay for all of his projects. So he's a Nazi beekeeper who steals gold. Great. You're a villain. You did it. So it's no surprise we haven't heard much about him. I mean, what a weird character. One day he found a beehive that was not like any other. So Fritz made a device that hoped would reawaken these bees, which he thought were like the end result of a mutation with a nearby fallen meteorite. The bees woke up, but then they continued to attack and kill Fritz, the beekeeper Fritz. No, not him. And then his consciousness was spread out through all of those bees, and now you have the swarm. Literally the bee's knees. I don't care how tough you think you are, there's no chance you're going toe to toe with bees. There's no fight. If I was swinging around the city and a swarm of bees was robbing a bank, I didn't see that. I'm just gonna keep heading to Aunt May's. No worries, headphones are going back in. Good luck. RIP, good game. And coming in at number 7, we have Mindworm. In Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1, Issue 138, we were introduced to William Turner. No, not that William Turner, although I'm sure he'd be great. He's probably fine. I'm talking about the telepathic, tragic, minor Spider-Man villain, Mindworm. Born with limited telepathic powers, he was the cause of his parents' untimely death, and he suffered from it for quite a while. So he grew up in an orphanage and protected himself from bullies using his mind powers, thus donning the nickname Mindworm. He's extremely smart. He even looks smart too, with his giant brain head. He attacked Peter once by hijacking the minds of others to do the dirty work, so people just started attacking him randomly. What I like most about this villain is he tries not to be a villain, for the most part at least. He just feels this tremendous guilt after being born this way. I mean, it's not his fault. Number 6, Red Goblin. Green Goblin plus Carnage equals holy shit. Appearing in the Amazing Spider-Man 798, Norman Osborn stole the Carnage symbiote, and then after that, it was just a nightmare. So Norman used the symbiote to eject all of the nanites, but then that ended up creating this monster mash, becoming the Red Goblin. Put them both together, very scary. The rare weaknesses that the symbiotes do have went away once the two had merged, right? So if you think you can use sound or fire to take this guy out, it's your funeral, no way. Green Goblin was fine with those things, so now the Carnage side of Red Goblin isn't affected either. Even the bombs that he used are like these Carnage pumpkin bombs that will like bite you. It's all fused together and it's really intimidating. I'd love to see more of the Red Goblin, let's go. And number 5, Calypso. Making her first appearance in Amazing Spider-Man 209, Calypso is a voodoo priestess who also happens to be the lover of Kraven the Hunter. After gaining her powers from sacrificing her own sister, it's safe to say she took the villain route. So what started out as her being the significant other to Kraven the Hunter soon turned into Calypso taking over the mind of the Lizard and using him. Not cool. You can see this take shape beginning in the Torment 5-part storyline. And with rumors of Kraven the Hunter being casted in the next Spider-Man flick, who knows, maybe we'll get a little sneak peek at Calypso as well. Fingers crossed. Number 4, the Red Vulture. Okay, so we talked earlier about the Red Goblin, so we might as well throw another big red in the mix while we're here. The Red Vulture made his comic book debut in Amazing Spider-Man issue 592, and while some may see the Vulture as Adrian Toomes, the Red Vulture is actually James Natal. So James started off working for the mob, of course, and then after the workload kept increasing and increasing, he requested some help. So his superiors figured it would be a great time to use him as his test subject to make a new super bad. Using the same technology that had created the Fly and the Scorpion, but with a little hint of, you know, memory loss thrown in there, Spider-Man found this monstrosity during a patrol, and he saw him eating a guy. He has acid spit, so it's not too hard to eat a guy. Even Peter gets some acid in his eyes. I mean, where's an emergency eye wash station when you need it? And coming in at number 3, Carry-On. AKA Miles Warren made his comic book debut back in Peter Parker's Spectacular Spider-Man issue 25. His powers are pretty amazing. I mean, I would love to see more of this guy. Everything he touches turns to dust. It turns to dust, red dust. It's very bad. He's creepy looking. I mean, he also carries this little like pouch side carry bag, so he looks creepy, but he also looks like he's running errands. So, I don't know. He's taking lives, but he's also late for work. He's a weird looking guy. The initial Carry-On was actually a clone of the Jackal, but the virus had made it outlive that body. So now we're left with this. Super strength, telepathy, levitation, super speed. It's pretty hard to avoid the touch of Carry-On, especially when he's motoring. This villain didn't last too long back in the late 70s, but he's interesting enough to check out. So go do that. And number 2, Morbius. We have to include Michael Morbius, the living vampire. I mean, after all, Jared Leto is set to take on the bloodthirsty mantle with a sneaky little peek at Michael Keaton's Vulture at the end of the Morbius trailer that we got earlier this awful year. A lot of people are wondering who this guy is now. Making his debut in Amazing Spider-Man 101, Michael Morbius was of course a scientist, and actually a Nobel Prize winning biochemist. Having a debilitating blood disease plus experimenting with bats to find a solution, you already know what's about to go down. The best part of his origin story is that when he meets Spider-Man for the first time, this just happens to be the time where Spider-Man is donning the 4 extra arms, and it's pretty entertaining. So Morbius, in his thirst for blood, is like, oh, that dude's got 6 arms, that's like a lot of blood. Oh boy, that would be pretty yummy. So Morbius attacks and does a pretty decent job. In comes Curtis Connors to help out. Or rather, you know, turn into the lizard and make Spider-Man's day go from bad to worse. I'm pretty pumped to see Jared Leto take flight with Morbius. I mean, I'm also pretty sure Jared Leto's already a vampire to begin with, so I'm sure his method acting will really come in handy. And closing off the list, coming in at number 1, we have Tombstone, a notable villain in the Spider-Man PS4 storyline, and making his debut in the late 80s in Web of Spider-Man 36. Tombstone, aka Lonnie Lincoln, grew up bullied due to his physicality. He was born albino and much taller and stronger than others, so naturally he himself also became a bully too. See how it works? Don't bully people. There's an idea. Down the road, he embraced it and became one of the biggest, baddest hitmen out there, taking out the trash for Kingpin himself. Weighing in at almost 500 pounds and towering at the height of 6'7", Lonnie is strong enough to lift 6 tons. So if you're a fan of the Spider-Man game, you'll agree he's one of the hardest villains in that entire storyline, and for good reason.
You got some stones, Rick. Let's see if they break.
Number 10, Blockbuster. Blockbuster might not be an A-list Bat villain, but I don't think I've ever mentioned him on this channel before, and I thought it was about time that we gave him a little shout out. We see you, Blockbuster, we see you. While not one of the most popular Bat villains, Blockbuster still packs a mighty punch. The current incarnation of the villain is Roland Desmond, who has reappeared in the Prime Earth continuity throughout the current Nightwing series. In fact, even though he started out as Detective Comics, he's now actually thought of more as a Nightwing villain. Even more recently resurfacing in Nightwing in issue 83. Blockbuster has also had many incarnations throughout the years since the character's first appearance as Mark Desmond back in 1965 in Detective Comics issue 345. Some versions have been tougher and more powerful than others, but all of them have possessed some level of super strength, durability, and stamina, usually granted to them by the Blockbuster serum, and often at the cost of some intelligence. However, the current Blockbuster does not suffer the same weakness, instead simply suffering physical pain if remaining in his transformed super buff state for too long.
And a 9, Condiment King. Okay, before you yell at me, hear me out a little bit, okay? Condiment King may just seem like a random dude who uses ketchup and mustard as a weapon, but you have to admit that would not fit in the DCEU. The DCEU has a much darker tone than the Batman animated series Condiment King was created for, and if he was in the DCEU, they would have to make him incredibly deadly for it to work properly. This guy would basically just use allergies as a weapon, and I don't mean like the oh you got the sniffles and your eyes are kind of itching kind of allergies. I mean like throat closes up and eyes pop out of your head kind of allergies. They would have to turn Condiment King into such a horrific killer that he would actually end up being overpowered and probably cause a lot of controversy. Even if it was just like condiments combined with acid instead of normal condiments, that would be absolutely nuts. You thought that they handled Doomsday bad? Wait until you see people's faces melting because they got hit with Dijon honey mustard and freaking acid.
Number 8, Mr. Freeze. Mr. Freeze is Victor Freeze, a vastly underrated Batman villain in my opinion, but admittedly a hard villain to bring to the big screen, though maybe not as hard to bring to the big screen as Condiment King. And that's not just because of his overall look and character design, but because of how capable he can be and how powerful he is. Mr. Freeze is one of the few Batman villains who actually possesses powers and isn't just a deranged criminal. Of course, he is still a deranged criminal. Mr. Freeze in current continuity is also a deranged scientist, who from an early age seemed to have a fixation with the cold and cryogenics. This fixation likely existed because of key tragic moments that had happened when he was younger, also taking place in and around the cold, such as his father abandoning him and his mother's fatal injury and later death death at his own hands. Freeze would become so obsessed he would convince himself that he was married to the subject of the first case of cryogenic stasis, despite the fact that she was technically like a lot older than him, Nora Fields. But a change to the timeline would make it so that this was actually true and that he and Nora had in fact been together before she was frozen, so she became his real wife, meaning their relationship was no longer considered one of Victor's delusions in main continuity. Mr. Freeze is not only powerful with his ice gun and unique physiology, which allows him to freeze anything he touches and create ice structures, but he is complex and unique in appearance, meaning we likely won't see him in the DCEU anytime soon. Not that I'm saying the villains aren't complex. That wasn't like a sick burn to the DCEU or anything, just to be clear.
Coming in at number 7, we have the intelligent zombie, Solomon Grundy. Inspired by a 19th century English nursery rhyme, Solomon Grundy was born centuries ago as a wealthy merchant, but after being murdered and having his body dumped in a swamp with mystical properties, he's now cursed to constantly be resurrected with slightly different properties each time. Usually being depicted as an incredibly physically strong zombie, Grundy is also incredibly resilient to both magic and physical damage, meaning that every time he's faced by either Batman or Superman, they need to figure out a clever new way to defeat him. Solomon Grundy has always been a dependable muscle for other villains throughout the years, but it would be nice to see him take more of a starring role in an upcoming Batman story. Coming in at number 6, we have Catman. Yep, that's not a typo, there's an actual Batman villain named Catman, and we'd love to see more of him in the comics as he continues to walk the fine line between villain and anti-hero. Born under the name Thomas Blake, Catman was initially a famous lion trapper that decided a life of crime was a better use of his peak human abilities, and even based his initial costume on that of the already established villain Catwoman. However, after years of being thwarted by Batman and becoming mocked by other supervillains, Catman reformed himself after some time in the jungle into becoming an anti-hero, and was most recently seen working alongside the Suicide Squad. With all of this character development making him more than just a joke character, Catman definitely deserves to face off against Batman once more. Coming in at number 5, we have Mr. Bloom, the plant-based villain. With the ability to plant seeds within people that would grant them incredible superpowers but at the cost of their lifespan, Mr. Bloom threw Gotham into chaos during a period where Bruce Wayne was unable to be Batman and Commissioner James Gordon had instead taken up the cape and cowl. The coolest thing about Mr. Bloom wasn't just the unique look of his powers and his visual design, but how they were able to manipulate the people and villains of Gotham into a new status quo so easily. Seeing this villain have a rematch with Bruce Wayne, or even get to interact more with the similarly plant-based Poison Ivy, seems like an obvious choice for a comeback, and I can't wait to see what this villain does next. Coming in at number 4, we have Prometheus. While not an alternate reality version of Bruce Wayne like several other villains on this list, Prometheus is still a dark reflection of the Batman, given that he had to watch his criminal parents be gunned down Bonnie and Clyde style by Gotham City police forces. Waging war against law enforcement and justice of any kind, Prometheus is made all the deadlier with his helmet that allows him to download fighting skills directly into his brain. It's this deadly combo of physical prowess and ideological differences that make Prometheus one of the more interesting Bat villains, and someone who definitely needs to be featured more often.
Number 2, Poison Ivy. Poison Ivy is one of my favorite characters in the Batman universe, period. And also coincidentally one of the most powerful villains I think that currently exists in Batman's wheelhouse. She is brewing up something huge lately in the Batman comics and has threatened basically the entire world on multiple occasions, but also has sought in the past to remind people of why she strikes out as an eco-terrorist, at times working with international science communities and political meets to fight against global warming and work towards preserving important parts of our ecosystem. However, while Poison Ivy will be coming to the Arrowverse on CW, we still have yet to have a casting for her in the DCEU, and this could be because Pamela Isley is just too crazy complicated and OP to show up there. After all, she has proven before how hard she is to take on in the comics. When she took over the world, it seemed almost nothing initially, not even Batman, would be able to stop her.
And at 10, Professor Pig. Professor Pig originally debuted in the alternate reality story of Batman number 666, which I love, as a corpse, which I love even more. However, he was introduced as a recurring character in 2009 in Batman and Robin number 1. In Batman Reborn, Laszlo Valentine was an extreme circus mob boss until something turned him into Professor Pig, leading him to begin funding his scientific experiments by selling narcotics to the criminal underworld. Because of course he did. All in all, he's an extremely disturbing villain and makes me think about why people aren't actually like afraid of pigs. If you put me in a room with this guy and like his pet pig, I would be scared of both. Professor Pig, if you couldn't already tell, wears a pig mask despite him spelling pig incorrectly in his name, along with a butcher's apron and what at times appears to be some form of like thrown together surgical outfit, like if he was like trying to get a last minute Halloween costume. It's freaking weird, okay? And he ends up like brainwashing and controlling various people, and then he ends up calling them Dollatrons. Honestly, I don't know what I would do, okay? I would just run away from this guy. And at 7, Scarecrow. The Scarecrow has made an appearance in the Dark Knight movies, however those aren't in the DCEU, at least yet. Until this point, the closest we've gotten is the Fear Gas from the Arrowverse crossover event of Elseworlds. However, that gas made some insane hallucinations that ended up with the Flash, who at the time was Oliver Queen's, speed to be useless, which would be incredibly overpowered when it comes to the rest of the DCEU. When Oliver and Barry were fighting, Barry was landing hits on Oliver despite not having his super speed, and Oliver wasn't knocking Barry away with super speed punches. This being used on a greater scale, like we would see Scarecrow do in an actual movie, would absolutely destroy the world, especially with heroes like Superman and Martian Manhunter. And we know that this is how the Scarecrow's gas would operate in the DCEU, because thanks to the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover, we got confirmation that Ezra Miller's Flash and Grant Gustin's Flash exist in the same multiverse. Or perhaps the cinematic universe exists within the antimatter universe. It would explain the darker themes. Either way, we know that's how the gas would work, and that would be a little too much to handle in one movie.
Number 6. Bane. Bane is known for being one of Batman's all-around strongest villains, but let's not forget that Bane also brings smarts to the table. Okay, so maybe not if we're counting the Harley Quinn animated series version of Bane, but comic book Bane at least is known for also possessing a brilliant mind. A lot of people forget that about him. He was the mastermind, in fact, behind the death of Alfred, which was also part of his scheme to break the Batman in a much more all-around way. Granted, he also took out Alfred because his demands were not being met. He'd basically ordered Batman not to make a rescue attempt, but then Damian Wayne did make a rescue attempt because he didn't listen to the warning that was given to them, and so Alfred died by Bane's hands after Damian's attempt failed. Bane, being such a massive man of muscle, also makes it hard to bring him to life. He's not only a hard villain to write, but he's also a difficult one to cast and depict as well, because he just looks like literally a brick house.
Halfway through, and at number 5, Arkham Knight. Not only is this character loved by some of the people who played the Batman Arkham series of games, the Arkham Knight is a highly skilled military technician who possesses expert knowledge of Batman's tactics and fighting style, which can be attributed to the fact that he was personally trained by the Vigilante, being revealed as Jason Todd, a moment that we all remember, for better or worse. He is a master of hand-to-hand combat, martial arts, and marksmanship. The high-tech military-like battle suit that he wears further enhances his physical strength, speed, and durability. When Batman was ambushed by the Dark Knight, he was able to knock the Dark Knight off his feet with one punch. This absolute mastery of Batman's tactics would make him a hella good villain, however the amount of power he has would probably be too much for the DCU. They already had Batman fight Superman and win, so they would have to supercharge Arkham Knight to make it an actually interesting fight, which would just ruin the character even more than some would consider him already ruined.
Number 4. Ra's al Ghul, or Ra's al Ghul, depending on what you prefer. A lot of people prefer Ra's, I prefer Ra's. We can all coexist, it's a beautiful world. Ra's is one of Batman's all-time greatest nemesis. While he might not possess direct superpowers of any kind, like most of Batman's rogues, he is one of the most skilled fighters and has one of the most brilliant minds. Like Bane. I like people with brilliant minds, apparently. Too bad Ra's usually uses his brilliant mind to concoct all sorts of schemes in order to topple governments, sow chaos, and gain power the world over. Ra's al Ghul is the head of the League of Assassins and has come close to completely defeating Batman in the past, with him even successfully using Batman's own research during the Tower of Babel JLA story to defeat all of Batman's superpowered colleagues on the team.
But ultimately, in at number 2, the Holiday Killer. More commonly referred to as Holiday, they are one of the principal antagonists protagonist of the story Batman: The Long Halloween. A serial killer operating in Batman's early career, the murderer targets various associates and members of Gotham's crime families. Holiday's identity is only revealed in the final issue of the story, though their identity is apparently resolved, it's still left up to question. After the events of Batman Year 1, Batman, Gordon, and Harvey Dent unite to take down the Carmine Falcone, the leader of the Falcone crime family and the most powerful criminal in Gotham City. Around the same time, though, a mysterious assailant begins targeting mafiosi members and killing them. Each of the killings use the same MO. The victim shot with a .22 pistol, with a baby bottle cap used as a silencer, and a memento is left signifying each holiday, like example, jack-o'-lantern for Halloween. Each victim is also connected either directly or indirectly to the Falcone or Maroni crime families, though at least 2 are connected to Holiday's operations. Several red herrings are also left to misdirect readers' assumptions towards other characters. The identity of Holiday is apparently revealed at the end of the series, however 3 major characters are directly connected to the Holiday identity, so you can't really be sure which one it is. Finally, and at number 1, the Joker. The Joker has undergone many revisions since his 1940 debut. The most common interpretation of the character is that of a man who, while disguised as the criminal Red Hood, is pursued by Batman and falls into a vat of chemicals that bleaches his skin, colors his hair green and his lips red, and then drives him insane. I mean, I don't know how it would bleach your skin, color your hair, and then change the color of your lips, but hey, whatever. The reasons why Joker was disguised as Red Hood and his identity before his transformation have changed over time. However, the lack of solid, consistent origin is only part of what makes this character so mysterious. During the Darkseid War storyline, Batman uses Metron's Mobius chair to find out what the Joker's real name is. The chair's answer, though, leaves Batman in disbelief. It's only revealed what it said in the DC Universe Rebirth one-shot, where Batman informs Hal Jordan that the chair told him that there were actually 3 different Jokers, not just 1. This revelation was the basis for the miniseries Batman 3 Jokers. 3 Jokers reveals that the 3 Jokers who work in tandem include the Criminal, which is the methodical mastermind based on the Golden Age Joker, the Clown, which is a goofy prankster based on the Silver Age Joker, and the Comedian, a psychopathic killer based on the Modern Age Joker who is obsessed with Batman. So yeah, certainly a mysterious character who has stood the test of time, and that's partly why people love him so much. You knew he was going to be on this list.
Number 10. Nuclear Man. Regarded by many as one of the strangest and most half-baked Superman villains to date, Nuclear Man hasn't had too many appearances outside of his introduction in 1987 Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. He was created by Lex Luthor from a strand of hair containing Superman's DNA, which he threw into a genetic stew. Superman is actually the one responsible for this villain's birth, though, as he wasn't fully born until Superman threw the nuclear missile containing the device that had the stew in it into the sun. Having been created using Kryptonian DNA, he possesses powers similar to Superman, such as invulnerability, energy projection, flight, and of course the standard super strength and speed. However, Nuclear Man needs to have constant exposure to sunlight in order to use them. If he's left out of the sun for too long, he becomes completely immobilized and must wait for some more sunlight in order to recharge. In the movie, Superman stopped Nuclear Man for good by causing a sudden solar eclipse when he moved the moon in front of the sun, then dropped him into the heart of a nuclear reactor where he could become an abundant source of energy for the remainder of his days. Now, like I said before, Nuclear Man hasn't made too many appearances outside of Superman 4, but if you want to see him in comic book form, check him out in his one-off appearance in 2018 Superman Volume 5, Number 2. Number 9. Microwave Man. Louis Paget from Earth 1, known as the costume baddie Microwave Man, has a pretty interesting story despite only appearing in 2 issues back in 1978. Paget spent 40 years traveling around the galaxy aboard an alien spacecraft before returning back to Earth in October of 1978. Now, not much is known about his life before his interstellar journey other than the fact that he was already known as the villain Microwave Man. Upon his return, Paget calls upon his alien friends one last time to grant him back his youth, even though doing this would shorten his remaining life to only a few more hours. This didn't seem to bother him, and once he was young again, Paget assumed the identity of Microwave Man once more and challenged Superman. Now, Paget's alien friends inform Superman that he only wants the glory of defeating him and will die very soon, so Superman, like the upstanding good guy that he is, allows Paget to defeat him in a test of strength, after which he dies satisfied, and the aliens come to claim his body to set adrift in space as he had once requested. Making his first appearance in 1978's Action Comics number 487, why not check his short run out for yourself. Number 8. The Puzzler. So little is known about either version of the Puzzler, so don't feel bad if you're not familiar with this character or just generally don't know who they are. The first to take up this name was Valerie Van Haften, a longtime admirer of Superman and someone who wanted nothing more than to get his attention, so she had the idea of becoming a heroine with the intent of one day joining his team. This proved to be a lot harder than she thought, and she quickly turned to crime instead and eventually joined the likes of the Secret Six to get a Get Out of Hell free card. Her powers are actually pretty cool, as she's made up of a bunch of indestructible puzzle pieces that she has full control over, allowing her to deconstruct at will and even fling the pieces at her opponents like a bullet. Now, the second puzzler is from the Prime Earth and is actually known as Puzzler Bot, a creation of that universe's puzzler that mimics the abilities of its creator through technological assimilation. That's about it when it comes to these characters, so if you know any more, please let me know in the comments below, but in the meantime, check them out for yourself in 2002's Superman Volume 2 number 187 and 2013's Justice League of America Volume 3 number 3. Number 7. Bloodsport. Now, unfortunately, a cool name doesn't always make for a cool villain. We've seen a few of Lex Luthor's henchmen take up the name Bloodsport, but let's focus on the first, Robert Dubois. Dubois suffered a mental breakdown after his brother had taken his place in the Vietnam War and became a quadruple amputee, resulting in Dubois spending 12 years bouncing between various psychiatric hospitals. Somehow, an agent of Lex Luthor persuades Dubois that Superman is to blame for all his troubles, causing him to adopt the name Bloodsport and go on a needless rampage in downtown Metropolis. Equipped with basic hand-to-hand combat skills and some unnamed tech from Luthor that allowed him to summon any weapon he desired from a remote location, Dubois caused some serious damage before being subdued after his brother confronted him. He spent several years in Stryker Island's penitentiary before Alex Trent, the person who took up the name Bloodsport after him, was brought to his attention. Believing it was the healthiest way for the two to work out their problems, the warden set up a boxing match between the two with Superman as the referee. However, things got out of hand pretty quickly and a riot broke out that allowed Dubois to escape. His freedom didn't last very long though, as he was quickly shot down by a prison guard. Check out his story for yourself, starting with 1987 Superman Volume 2, number 4. Number 6. Bruno Mannheim. Bruno Ugly Mannheim had the honor, or I don't know, maybe dishonor depending on how you look at it, of being introduced not in a Superman comic, but in the spin-off series Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen. Mannheim starts off as a pretty run-of-the-mill stereotypical gangster, trying to just stake a claim for himself in Metropolis, but eventually morphs into something very different and ultimately confusing. With no real powers unless you consider greed and brutality to be special, Mannheim was beefed up by DC when he was made leader of the Intergang, a worldwide crime syndicate that answers to no one other than Darkseid. Basically, Mannheim is this interesting amalgamation of some of the best villains out there, as he is known to go full-blown Hannibal Lecter sometimes, you know, eating his enemies / subordinates that disobey him, and he also flip-flops between being a super genius like Lex Luthor to an overwhelming powerhouse like Darkseid. Yeah, I know, it's all a little bit confusing, so why not check him out for yourself so you can make some more sense of his character, starting with his first appearance in 1971's Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, number 139. Number 5. The Prankster. Once the extremely popular host of the Uncle Oswald show, Oswald Loomis became the prankster after his show was cancelled and ultimately ended his career in comedy. His first assault on Metropolis was an all-out barrage of practical jokes that ended in his surrender. After a while, Loomis resurfaced with a much younger and athletic body thanks to selling his soul to Lord Satanus, and this changed everything. With a more serious personality and affinity for dangerous tricks, Loomis basically became a slightly less twisted version of the Joker, and his only goal was to make the world laugh via his own twisted ways. When Metropolis was taken over by Brainiac 13, he took advantage of all the futuristic tech available and upgraded his existing gadgets, which proved to be pretty effective against even the likes of Superman. However, this was probably because the Man of Steel was suffering from kryptonite poisoning at the time and did not have full access to his powers. Skip ahead a little bit to when the Joker took over the world and we meet a slightly altered Halloween mask wearing prankster who acts as Joker City's exorcist, whose goal is to expel the evil from those who still believe in science. Thankfully for everyone out there, he was eventually apprehended by Superman and taken to Belle Reve to serve his time for all his crimes. Having made his first appearance all the way back in 1988 Superman Volume 2 number 16, give his story a read for yourself and let me know what you think in the comments below.
Number 4. Atomic Skull. So Atomic Skull was created back in the 1970s and has faced Superman numerous times. So basically, Joseph Martin got hit by a gene bomb and became Atomic Skull. His powers include super strength, gives off huge amounts of radiation, and has a flaming radiation type skull for his head. Now, as scary as this guy is, these powers definitely took their toll on Joseph as he started getting brain damage. The damage sort of led to Joseph to change his persona to Atomic Skull. He is known to be quite erratic and can be quite violent due to some hallucinations.
Number 3. Terraman. Tobias Manning, aka Terraman, was once a businessman who one day realized just how much damage he was causing to the Earth and its environment. With his newfound conscience, Manning took up a personal vendetta against any company that was causing damage to the environment. Using weapons that focused on turning the environment around his enemies against them, he has caused some serious damage in the name of the Earth, and that earned him a spot on the Secret Society of Villains during the events of Infinite Crisis. Even after this catastrophic event, Terra Man continued his nefarious ways by hijacking a plane over the Middle East. Thanks to Black Adam, he escaped both harm and capture for this crime. However, in hindsight, teaming up with Black Adam probably wasn't the best idea for him, because when Black Adam later appeared to address the media in front of Kahndaq's New York embassy, he ripped Terra Man in half with no warning, and that was the end of this nature-loving villain until he was resurrected during the events of the Blackest Night. Why not give his story a read for yourself, starting with his first appearance all the way back in 1990's Superman Volume 2, number 46. Number 2, Hellspawn. Although he was originally created as the nemesis of the Wildcats in the Wildstorm universe, Hellspawn made his way onto the villain roster for Superman when that universe was brought into the DC universe in the New 52 relaunch. As a Daemonite, Hellspawn possesses a ridiculous amount of powers thanks to his alien physiology, such as, but definitely not limited to, chronokinesis, accelerated healing, and telepathy, and when combined with his Akurian host body, he is shown to possess super strength and speed that are able to outmatch even the Man of Steel himself. Hellspawn made his first documented move against humanity by trying to start a nuclear war between the most powerful nations on Earth in order to allow humanity to destroy itself so the planet would be empty for the Daemonites. However, this plan didn't really pan out as he was stopped by Team 1 and Mr. Majestic. In the rebooted Wildstorm universe, Hellspawn is now a super evolved living hive mind because apparently when the number of Daemonites reaches a certain number, a central mind is created. Hellspawn now has the knowledge and intelligence of every member of the entire Daemonite race, and its synthetic body is a rad looking mix of flesh, metal, and fire. Thanks to this, he has moved into a league of his own when it comes to power. However, we are still waiting to see it all in action. Now, I did have to skip over a lot of cool stuff regarding this character, so check out his story for yourself, starting with his first appearance in 1992's Wildcats number 1. And coming in at number 1, we have Conduit. Kenny Braverman was, funnily enough, born on the same day that Superman's ship arrived on Earth. His fate was not exactly as lucky as our Man of Steel's. While his parents were on the way to the hospital, they ended up having to pull over to the side of the road due to the heavy storm, and he was born curbside, incredibly close to Clark's ship, and the exposure to the kryptonite caused some side effects that would manifest later in life. All throughout their younger years, Clark and Kenny were rivals, competing in everything from sports to girls, and this probably caused some serious self-esteem issues for Kenny because Clark always seemed to come out on top. After high school, Kenny went on to join the CIA and grew more and more reckless as his dormant abilities started to change his personality. Turns out Kenny's body is basically a living conduit for all energy, and it can process, manipulate, and even generate forms of energy in many destructive ways. Upon realizing this, Kenny took up the mantle of Conduit and decided it was finally time to get his revenge on Clark. However, all of his attempts seemed to fail. Later confronted by Superman, Kenny deduced that Clark and the Man of Steel were one and the same, which was perfect for him because they were literally the only people he wanted to kill. So, he set all his sights on getting rid of Superman. Kenny manages to catch Superman and traps him in a mock version of Smallville, and the two face off one-on-one in a replica of their childhood football stadium. Unfortunately for Kenny, he succumbed to his madness and supercharged himself with kryptonite energy, effectively overloading his powers and killing him in the process. Why not give Conduit's story a read for yourself, starting with his first appearance all the way back in 1994's Superman, the Man of Steel number 0, and let me know what you think in the comments below.
Number 10. The Dummy. The Dummy was created in the 1940s and has faced Superman countless times. Now, he isn't just strictly a Superman villain, he has faced other superheroes as well. He's quite intelligent and uses a gun quite a bit. Not much else is known about his backstory, since it was never really revealed if he was actually a literal ventriloquist dummy or just something else. Yeah, that's how we got this Man of Sand. See what I did there? He is quite the powerful foe, and if they are close, he can drain the Man of Steel's powers. The other crazy thing about how these two are linked is that the planet will blow up if they have any physical contact, since he can drain and consume Superman's powers. He even sort of turned good, wanting to save lives, instead of hurting them. Number 6. Mr. Zed. Mr. Zed is immortal and quite fascinated with famous people. So what he likes to do is travel, through a time to capture famous people and his crystal, and that is on top of his cane, basically capturing their souls. He also has the power of hypnotizing people and resurrection. Of course, he became fascinated with Superman. When attempting to try and capture Superman into his crystal, he is unsuccessful due to where he came from and how powerful the Man of Steel is. In the end, his crystal explodes, freeing most of the souls that he captured throughout time. He has faced off with him other times as well, whether it was in the past or the present day version of himself. Number 5. Master Jailer. The Master Jailer, aka Death Trap, worked for Star Labs in creating cells for superpowered individuals. He is incredibly smart and was asked to try and figure out a way to hold Superman in the cell, but proved he couldn't do it. That didn't stop his obsession with trying to figure out how he could one day trap the Man of Steel in one of his cells, though. He found out Superman's identity, Clark Kent, and wanted to try and go after his friends as a way to get him to cooperate. He also teamed up with some of Superman's longtime foes, but he was never able to fully capture the Man of Steel like he always wanted.
Number 4. Lois Lane Robot. On New Earth and during his quest for the power he lost in Blackest Night, Lex Luthor decided it was a good idea to take a Brainiac probe stored in LexCorp and a sample of Lois Lane's DNA to create a robotic version of her that would serve as his quote-unquote conscience. Unfortunately for him, before he was able to complete the programming, he was held hostage by some bandits under the control of Mr. Mind, and he himself was put into a mental illusion. The Lois Lane robot was functional enough though to activate all of its weapon systems, allowing it to take out all of the thugs and bring Luthor back into reality. Armed to the brim with state-of-the-art technology and weapons, her robotic android body allows her to repair any damage received, and also gives her the ability to fly alongside super strength, durability, and speed. Now, not long after their run-in with Mr. Mind, Luthor, Deathstroke, and Lanebot head to Antarctica to find a black orb that is somehow related to the Black Power Ring energy. The effects of this orb were enough to cause Deathstroke and his men to completely lose control and attack one another. However, Lanebot was not affected as she is inorganic. That was the last time we saw the Lois Lane robot, so until they grace the comic book pages once again, check them out in their first appearance in 2010's Action Comics number 890.
Number 3. Cancer. This is definitely an interesting villain, and one for sure I definitely had not heard of at all. So somewhere down the line, Superman developed cancerous cells. When they removed the actual cells from Superman's body, what do? What do you know? We got our villain Cancer. Yes, he came to life from the removal of these cancerous cells in Superman's body. Since he came from Superman, he has most of Superman's powers, as well as being able to completely destroy a human body with just a touch from him. Since he is connected to Superman, he has weird issues about him being his father or whatnot. So, it's a little bit strange. Number 2, Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace was created in the 1980s and has the power of mind control, and with that power, she can manipulate others. Amazing Grace works with a villain known as Darkseid as his agent. So she basically lives amongst the people of Apokolips and tries to root out who are the most unloyal to him and who would betray him in an instance. She finds these people and basically betrays them once they show their true colors. She has done this with Superman in a sense, by luring him in to save her when really she did not need saving at all. It was just a ploy to manipulate him and to make him believe that he was Darkseid's son, which he actually believed. In the end, Orion, Darkseid's true son, who they were waging war on, used the Mother Box to give Superman his mind back.
And now, number 1, Zah-Vam the Invincible. This dude appeared in Action Comics 351 in 1967. Zah-Vam was created by the god of Olympus after they looked into the future and saw Superman, believing him to be a rival god. Zah-Vam was built from clay and sent off to defeat the Man of Steel. Using godlike powers making him seemingly unstoppable, he becomes the leader of the United Crime Syndicate and humbles Superman. Superman is only able to finally defeat Zah-Vam after collecting a magical belt from another group of gods led by Neptune. Zah-Vam's name is an anagram in reference to the godlike powers he possesses, including Zeus, Hercules, Achilles, and others. He has not reappeared since his defeat, but it would be nice.
Number 10. White Rabbit. You might not think of Lorena Dodson as being a very dark villain. She's just a woman after all who's obsessed with Alice in Wonderland and basically turned to a life of crime because she was bored. Her greatest power is her wealth, which allows her the gadgets and goons she needs to be a supervillain and a criminal. However, during the Absolute Carnage tie-in, Symbiote Spider-Man, we get a little side story involving a man who once wore the symbiote suit unknowingly that also features Dodson. In it, she ends up aiming to scare the man who is actually a judge that condemns her in court after being a witness to her causing a public disturbance and assaulting civilians at a local burger joint. Her scare attempt, however, results in the death of the man's son, who goes into cardiac arrest. The whole story is pretty dark.
And coming in at number 9, we have The Spot. Making his first appearance in Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man issue 98, The Spot isn't exactly the coolest villain per se. I mean, he doesn't throw pumpkin bombs, he's not made of 1,000 spiders, but when Jonathan Owen was exposed to the spotted dimension during an experiment, his skin became white with black spots, and those spots acting as warps in space. Honestly, this character is super unique. In his second issue, you really see what he can do. He uses these portals to punch through space and hit his victims far away. He holds these portals like frisbees, and personally, I would love to see this guy fight Doctor Strange. The whole portal versus portal action alone would be mint. And they're both doctors. So why hasn't this happened yet? I don't know. Seeing Spider-Man use his portals to hit Thanos in Infinity War makes me think if the Spot was in a Spider-Man movie, it would be just hours of that. And honestly, that would be sweet. I'm here for it. I wish I was the Spot. Scratching your back would be so much easier. Instead of reaching and like trying to like pull your shoulders out, no thank you. Much better.
Number 8. Tombstone. Some might think that Tombstone is some kind of zombie or Frankenstein's monster type villain just based on his look. While Lonnie Lincoln was later on mutated by exposure to a chemical, which granted him superhuman strength and durability, previous to this, he was actually just a crime boss with albinism. In fact, it was likely all the teasing that he suffered as a child due to his condition that likely encouraged him to become an indomitable criminal, filing down his teeth to appear more intimidating. His dark, grim, yet striking appearance is also a result of the time period in which he was introduced. Tombstone made his first appearance in the Web of Spider-Man series in 1988. He's definitely got a very 80s villain look. Number 7. Sauron. We've talked about the dark tragedy that is Morbius' existence, and now it's time to talk about another monster villain of Spider-Man's rogue gallery, Sauron. Carl Lycos was bit by pteranodons from the Savage Lands while on an expedition with his father. These bites would cause Carl to transform later on, causing him to need to drain the life energy of others in order to survive, basically turning him into an energy vampire. But from there, his story would only get more strange and tragic. While siphoning energy from a mutant, he underwent a further transformation, turning him into a hybrid creature, part pteranodon, part human. While Sauron was originally introduced as a villain during the X-Men comics, Spider-Man would face him during his time working alongside the mutants, both taking on Sauron and the team known as the Savage Mutates, and later fighting against Sauron with his own mutant class that he was currently leading and teaching. I love Spider-Man as a mutant teacher, I think it's super cute. Number 6. Kane. Kane Parker was the broken clone that Jackal brought into the world first, his first discarded attempt at cloning Peter Parker. He's also the epitome of 90s edge and darkness with his originally dark billowing locks and tattered cape. Although not specifically a Spider-Man villain anymore, when Kane was originally introduced he was very much a misguided rogue. Kane is also known for his fragile psyche and unique ability known as the Mark of Cain. Many originally thought that this ability was Kane emitting acid from his hands to burn his victims, but in reality he actually has a bunch of tiny hooks on his hands that allow him to climb, like many spider folk and actual spiders. He can use these hooks to dig into someone's flesh, making it look like he has left an acid burn when really he just dug a bunch of super tiny spider hooks into their face. Yay. Number 5. Kraven. For Kraven the Hunter, Spider-Man has always been the #1 prize. This was the inspiration for the story Kraven's Last Hunt, where it appeared that Kraven had finally captured and defeated Spider-Man by killing him. In truth, he had simply incapacitated Spider-Man, placing him in a comatose, death-like state for a few weeks. When Spider-Man awoke, he discovered that Kraven had basically been standing in for him while he was out, and it was revealed to Peter that Kraven's whole plan was to beat Spider-Man at his own game, proving that he himself was a better hero than the Spider by becoming sort of Spider-Man? In the end, Kraven felt he had accomplished what he had set out to do, and in a way also showed respect for Peter Parker's approach to heroism. Feeling that he was almost at peace with the world, Kraven took his own life, ending his legacy. Or at least, this would have been a dark but meaningful end to his legacy, but instead of staying dead, Kraven would later be resurrected. Oh, comics. Number 4. Kingpin. Despite the fact that Kingpin isn't one of the first people you think of when you think of dark and menacing Spider-Man villains, he's been around since the early days of Spider-Man's adventures, appearing in Spider-Man comics in the 1960s alongside many of Spider-Man's other classic villains. Wilson Fisk has always been one of the darkest, most menacing villains because of the amount of power and control that he wields. In the film Into the Spider-Verse, we saw respect paid to this character in terms of how great of a Spider-Man villain he truly is, when he became the big bad of the film that Miles and his team of Spider-Folks went up against. He was also the one responsible for killing the Peter Parker from Miles' own reality. And in the comics, he also almost killed Spider-Man's Aunt May, after learning of Spider-Man's secret identity and choosing to target those Peter loved during the events of the Back in Black story. Number 3. Kindred. This villain is pretty dark since it's been alluded to that they are a demon from hell. In life, they were someone close to Peter Parker who was betrayed by him and by Norman Osborn. They have returned to get vengeance and use demonic centipede creatures to manipulate others by having these summoned creatures crawl inside those that they wish to torment. Ick. But also not ick to house centipedes, which are lovely little creatures who feed on other house pests. We like house centipedes, but we do not like demon mind control centipedes. Yes? Except MJ maybe is a fan, as she was actually pretty nice to kindred centipedes prior to us really knowing that they were definitely a villain out to get revenge on Peter Parker, of course. Number 2. Carnage. Sure, Kindred is a former human and current demon from hell, but Carnage is like a demon on Earth. Even disregarding the dark attachment that the Carnage symbiote had to serial killer Cletus Cassidy, Carnage recently became an even more darker villain after the Carnage symbiote appeared to die attempting to preserve Cletus during his re-entry to the Earth's atmosphere. While attempting to protect its human host, the symbiote actually burned up, and even more tragic, depending on your perspective I guess, it failed to save Cletus, who also appeared to have died on arrival. However, the Null-worshipping cult known as the Church of Darkness managed to resurrect Cletus by bonding the Grendel symbiote to him, allowing them to become a new Carnage known as Dark Carnage. Cletus was intended to be the vessel that would allow Null to awaken and return, but in order to do so he would have to collect codices from the spines of those who had previously bonded to a symbiote. I mean, dark is also in the name for this version of Carnage, but also this guy literally eats spines for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So yeah, pretty dark. Number 1. Mephisto. Of course, it can't possibly get more dark than Mephisto. When it comes to his feud with Spider-Man, or Spider-Folks for that matter, Mephisto seems to have a bit of an obsession. He saved Aunt May for Peter in exchange for his marriage to MJ, saved Miles Morales as Spider-Man's teammates in exchange for the life of a civilian that Miles had saved in that other timeline where his teammates died, and he convinced Otto Octavius as Superior Spider-Man to return to a life of villainy in order to defeat an alternate reality Spidey who was also that Earth's Norman Osborn. That's like getting rid of 2 Spider-Men with 1 stone. I like to imagine he keeps these little wins and trophies in a shrine that he has in his closet, because he is secretly the biggest Spider-Man fan ever. He even possessed Gwenpool's brother, and she's really only a small percentage related to the Spider-Verse as a sort of alternate version of Gwen Stacy mixed with Deadpool. Mephisto has revealed it's his dream to make life a living hell for all Spider-Folks everywhere. How nice. Add in the fact that he's basically Marvel's version of the devil, and you've got one twisted and dark Spider-Man villain. Possibly the most dark. Number 10. Sandman. Sandman has always had a kind of tragic story. He was a criminal who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and due to radioactive exposure was granted his sand shape-shifting abilities. He hasn't always been a villain, and sometimes strives to become a sort of hero, though he usually ends up becoming a criminal once more in the end, tragically. He even has been known to be a sometimes friend of the Fantastic Four's Ben Grimm, aka The Thing, and Spider-Man. One dark story involving Sandman took place during one of the many times he fought Spider-Man. Spider-Man usually had creative and sometimes twisted methods when it came to how he chose to defeat Sandman. He vacuumed Sandman up at one point, tossed him into a wind turbine, and he's even set him on fire. But Spider-Man also at one point exposed Sandman to an experimental chemical substance, which caused Sandman to become insane and also caused him to become severely dirty, as dust and garbage and debris became attracted to him and entangled within him. The worst part of this was when Sandman pleaded with Spider-Man to fix him as his mental state continued to worsen and deteriorate. And initially, Spider-Man was actually a jerk and refused to help. Pretty messed up. Number 9. Vermin. Vermin was a Spider-Man villain who really only became such because of previously being abused by others throughout his life. Edward Whalen as a young boy was severely mistreated by his father and ended up running away because of this. He then ran into Baron Zemo and Arnim Zola and became the victim of their experiments, which transformed him into a rat-like humanoid creature. They sent Vermin on a mission to eliminate their enemy, Captain America. This conflict eventually led him to be apprehended later on by both Captain America and Spider-Man, who ran into Vermin in New York City. Vermin would also become the prey of Kraven during his last hunt, and from there would end up becoming allies with Spider-Man actually. Number 8. Hammerhead. Hammerhead has a pretty dark origin story in comparison to some other villains. He and his family had left the Soviet Union when he was young, and he grew up claiming to be Italian instead of Russian, even preferring to speak Italian in his family's home. However, this would anger his father and would prompt him to beat his son with a hammer, scarring up the young boy's head. That's pretty messed up. In the end, Hammerhead managed to work his way into the Italian mob and would also end up beating Spider-Man in a fight. He was given both cybernetic enhancements, including a partial adamantium skeleton, and had his strength level increased by Mr. Negative. He also has been known to work with Black Cat when she is walking on the more villainous criminal and organized crime side of things. Hammerhead would also get revenge on his father, killing him with a large hammer. His origin could have possibly served to inspire the Daredevil Netflix series Origins for Wilson Fisk, who also killed his father with the hammer. Number 7. Mindworm. Mindworm might not have been a major Spider-Man villain, but that doesn't mean that his story wasn't super dark and tragic. Mindworm was William Turner, a mutant with powerful psionic powers who was kinda like a mental energy vampire, not to be confused with Will Turner from Pirates of the Caribbean. William needed to feed on others' mental energy or he'd actually die. As a child, he accidentally killed his mother in front of his father, draining her mental energy completely. His father went into shock and died as a result of witnessing this. William would then be raised in an orphanage, studying passionately and known for his intelligence. As an adult, he fed off of his neighbor's mental energy, taking a little from each person in his area, but not enough to kill anyone. Unfortunately, Spider-Man was one of his neighbors and sensed what Mindworm was doing. Misunderstanding that William's psychic attack was for evil purposes, Spider-Man fought Mindworm and handed him over to the police. Later on, the two enemies would actually become friends. However, Mindworm would also later on once again relapse, becoming a criminal, as well as becoming severely mentally ill, in addition to being homeless. This all culminated into prompting Mindworm to give up when he was being attacked by a street gang and allow himself to be killed. So sad. Poor Mindworm. Number 6. Hobgoblin. There has been more than one Hobgoblin over the years, but many of them have proven to be quite dark villains. Roderick Kingsley as the Hobgoblin would be the one responsible for the creation or transformation of Peter Parker's friend and Betty Grant's husband, Ned Leeds, into another version of that villain. Ned Leeds was brainwashed by the Hobgoblin and convinced to commit criminal acts, even sometimes believing that he himself was actually Roderick Kingsley, the Hobgoblin, causing him to behave extremely villainously, adopting the Hobgoblin persona for himself. When Ned Leeds was murdered, it was because Kingsley had leaked the true identity of Hobgoblin as being Leeds, causing him to be targeted and killed by the Foreigner. Number 5. Morlun. Even when Morlun is not threatening the entire existence of all of the spider totems in massive stories like Spider-Verse or Spider-Geddon, he's still pretty terrifying. Despite looking like a gothic vampire wannabe, Morlun is actually one of the Inheritors, a family of energy vampires who feed off of totems throughout the multiverse. In the story The Other, he also tormented Peter mercilessly, almost killing him at one point, beating him to death, and eating one of his eyeballs. Ew. Number 4. Norman Osborn. Green Goblin, as he was originally known, has had a lot of different villain identities. Norman Osborn is often a criminal mastermind, and was the criminal mastermind behind the events of Dark Reign, when he was known as the leader of the Dark Avengers, Iron Patriot. He's also stepped in as a sort of alternate Carnage, believing he himself was in fact Cletus Cassidy, and has been known as the combination villain of Red Goblin as well, probably one of the most terrifying iterations we have seen of him yet as a villain. And he was also the Goblin King for a time. No relation to Madeline Pryor's Goblin Queen, by the way. But when it boils down to it, Norman Osborn is one of the darkest Spider-Man villains because he is so focused on going that extra mile just to find new and insanely twisted ways to torture Peter Parker and Spider-Man. Dude is crazy. I love it. Number 3. Lizard. Lizard is one of the darkest villains on Spider-Man's roster because of how tragic his origins are. Kirk Connors basically is a victim in a monster horror story, a sort of werewolf-like scenario, but as a lizard instead of a wolf. Dr. Connors simply sought to explore the science behind possible limb regeneration, and it was his studies and exposure to an experimental serum that caused him to transform into the villain known as the Lizard. He is often presented as a villain who has no choice but to give in to his animal instincts, which is what makes him so villainous, while Connors himself really has no intention to harm others. The monster within him, however, the Lizard, often does. At one point he transforms back into the villain known as the Lizard during a story called Shed, and is tragically consumed by his animal instincts completely, which causes him to eat his own son. It doesn't get much darker than that. Number 2. Scorpion. Originally, Matt Gargan was just a private investigator hired by Jameson to uncover the secret of how exactly Peter Parker was able to get the best pictures of Spider-Man. He was later coerced into participating in an experiment wherein he was combined with the traits of a scorpion. This gave Gargan superpowers but also drove him insane, transforming him into a criminal and a villain. During Dark Reign, Matt Gargan would become Norman Osborn's Spider-Man on his Dark Avengers team, bonding with the Venom symbiote, and becoming one of the most vicious iterations of Venom to date when bonded with it. In fact, anytime Scorpion and the Venom symbiote have merged in the comics, they become a deadly villain, often going on a murderous rampage, shamelessly consuming their victims, and becoming an almost uncontrollable level of deadly. If you thought Eddie Brock's Venom was scary, no. Scorpion as Venom is scary. Number 1. Jackal. Jackal, of course, is one of the darkest Spider-Man supervillains around. He was Gwen Stacy's teacher, Professor Warren, but became obsessed with Gwen and fell in love with her. When Gwen died during the battle between Green Goblin and Spider-Man, the professor blamed Spider-Man and decided he would create a clone of her and Peter Parker, after learning of Spider-Man's true identity. He was the villain behind the events of Clone Saga, creating more than one clone of Peter and of Gwen Stacy. And if you thought the Scorpion was scary, Jackal was also a villain who teamed up with Scorpion and even sent him to kill Spider-Man at one point. He also kidnapped and threatened the life of people Parker cared for, such as his good friend, Ned Leeds.